Hello, I'm Ruth Godfrey from the University of Leicester Botanic Garden, and this video is about the classification of living things. You will learn about how living things are classified into different groups based on their shared characteristics, such as body parts in animals. It is important to remember that we need to include the living things that are now extinct. The vocabulary you'll need to know is classification, that is the grouping of living things together that are similar. For example, in the picture, you've got a group of flowering plants. The species are the individual living things. So the red flowers are poppies, the large white flowers Michaelmas daisies, the blue flowers cornflowers, and so on. Microorganisms are very small living things that can only be seen through a microscope. Species are kinds of living things that usually look very similar to each other and can mate and produce offspring that also look very similar to themselves. So far, 8 million species have been identified on Earth. Because the species can be found in different countries, they sometimes have different common names. For example, a mountain lion has several other common names, such as cougar and puma. To avoid confusion, all species have a two-part Latin name, one that is like a surname that all close relatives share, and the other like a first name for the individual and distinguishes it from other close relatives. The example on the right shows the two-part names of blue tit, the family name and the species name. Also shown is an azure tit. This has the same family name as the blue tit, but a different species name. So how do we group living things? Have a look at this slide and think about how you would group them. Perhaps you thought about colour, whether they have spots, how many legs they have, or even how they get their food. Do they catch it? Do they grow on dead plants? Or do they photosynthesize, that is, use the energy from the sun to turn water and carbon dioxide into sugar? The methods scientists use to group living things are how they are related to each other. Carl Linnaeus, a scientist working about 300 years ago, realised that as more and more plants and animals were being discovered, a system was needed to group similar things together. He very carefully studied the similarity and differences between living things and rocks, and in 1735 he published A System of Nature, creating a classification system. He divided everything into 3 kingdoms: animals, plants and rocks, and we still use his system for classifying animals today. He classified about 6,000 plants and 4,000 animals and gave everything a 2-word name. Linnaeus only had 2 groups or kingdoms of living things, plants and animals. However, because of the invention of very powerful microscopes since Linnaeus' time, we are now able to see many, many more microscopic organisms, and therefore we have more groups. We now have animal, fungi and plant kingdoms and several kingdoms of different microorganisms, including a bacteria kingdom. Fungi are classed separately from plants as they take their nutrients from dead plants and don't photosynthesize, that is, make their food from using the energy from sunlight as flowering plants do. Interestingly, viruses aren't in any of these groups because they're not classed as living things. This is because they cannot reproduce alone, only inside living things. Taxonomy is the science of classifying living things. We've already mentioned kingdoms. Each of these kingdoms, including animals, plants, fungi and bacteria, are divided into further groups known as phylum. Then each of these phylum groups are divided into classes. Classes divide into orders, then divide into families, then genus, and finally into species. A leopard is shown. It is in the animal kingdom. It has a backbone, so it's in the backbone or chordata phylum. It is in the mammal class. It eats meat, so it's a carnivore, and it's therefore in the Carnivora order. It is in the cat family, or Felidae, and the Panthera genus based on animals with a similar skull. The Panther genus contains the species lion, panther, leopard, tiger, and now, after recent research, also the snow leopard, which originally was not thought to be related. The animal kingdom is then split into two phylum, those with vertebrae, that is those that have a backbone, and invertebrates, those without. The invertebrates are then subdivided into 10 classes. These include classes of jellyfish, mollusks, those include slugs and snails, classes of different types of worms, arthropods that include spiders, insects and crabs, and a starfish class. Don't worry about trying to read or understand all the words on the green lines. They are left in to show you the relationships. For example, you can see that mollusks and worms are much more closely related to each other than they are to the microscopic nematodes. Those in the vertebrate phylum are then divided into 4 classes: mammals, amphibians, fish, and a group including birds and reptiles. The class of arthropods is the invertebrate group you will have seen the most of species. The arthropod class is split into the orders of spiders and scorpions, crabs and lobsters, and insects. Insects all have 6 legs, 3-part bodies, which you can see very clearly on the beetle, and usually have wings. The order of insects are divided into the families shown: beetles, butterflies and moths, flies, bees, wasps, ants, bugs, grasshoppers and dragonflies. The beetle family is the biggest. Back to the 2 phylums of vertebrates and invertebrates from the animal kingdom. Now we will look at how the vertebrate phylum is divided. Again, don't worry about all the information on the blue lines. This detail will be covered later in the video. It is to show you the relationships. There are about 28,000 species in the fish class. They are cold-blooded. That is, they are the temperature of their environment rather than regulating their own temperature. They can only live in water and have gills that enable them to take oxygen from the water. They lay soft jelly-like eggs in water, have a scaly skin, and those that are carnivores have teeth. Amphibians are also cold-blooded and lay soft eggs in water. However, amphibians have an extra larva stage in their life cycle. Larvae hatch from the soft eggs that do not look like the adult. For example, frogs are amphibians and their eggs hatch to tadpoles. Over time, these make the body changes or metamorphosis into young frogs who then grow to adults. Amphibians can live on land and have lungs, but also a moist, smooth skin that can take in oxygen underwater. They only have a few teeth at the front and the top of their mouths. The classes of amphibians is divided into orders of frogs and toads, salamanders and newts, and caecilians that have no legs. Reptiles, birds and dinosaurs are all related. Reptiles are cold-blooded and have a scaly skin, and most lay their eggs with hard shells on land, even when they spend most of their life at sea, such as turtles. Most members of the reptile class have 4 legs. However, the snake order has no legs. Some reptiles have teeth. Dinosaurs are in this class. Birds are warm-blooded and lay hard shells on land. They have 4 limbs, 2 front legs and 2 wings. They have feathers which are modified skin scales and have beaks instead of teeth. On the screen you will see pictured some of the stages of how dinosaurs evolved into birds. The class of mammals includes humans. Mammals are warm-blooded. They give birth to live young and receive milk from the mother. They are usually hairy and have teeth. Most have 4 limbs. This can be 4 legs or 2 arms and 2 legs. Whales and dolphins have 2 flippers. The plant kingdom is divided into 9 phylum: red algae, green algae, hornworts, liverworts, mosses, lycopods, ferns, conifers and flowering plants. The red algae and green algae live in water, which includes the seaweeds. The rest live on land. Hornworts, liverworts and mosses are the simplest land plants. They don't have a developed root system or conductive tissue that takes water and food through the plant. This means they can't control water loss from their leaves, so need to live in wet and damp places. They don't have seeds and reproduce using spores. The middle picture shows the spores of moss held in tiny cases ready to be released. Lycopods are more complex. They do have roots and also conductive tissue so they can control water loss. They have small, simple leaves and reproduce using spores, not seeds. Ferns have roots, conductive tissue, and large, complex leaves. They reproduce with spores which form on the underside of their leaves. There are currently about 10,500 known species of fern. Conifers have roots, conductive tissue, complex leaves, and produce seeds. The seeds are produced inside cones, not flowers. Flowering plants have roots, conductive tissue, complex leaves, and produce seeds using flowers. The male pollen on the anther in flowers is released and connects with the female stigma. The pollen then grows a tube down the style to join with the ovary and a seed is formed. So far, 369,000 species of flowering plants have been identified. All these photographs were taken at the University of Leicester Botanic Garden. Clearly you can see many of the species shown are flowering plants. Which other classification groups can you see?